Good morning. Welcome to Dress for Success Toronto's Day 2 of our Mastering the Job Search Through a Pandemic virtual conference. My name is Kate Green, and I'm the Executive Director for Dress for Success Toronto. For those of you who are new to Dress for Success, we're part of a global movement for change. We're a local affiliate of an international nonprofit operating in over 150 cities worldwide. Since 2009, we have helped over 15,000 women in the Greater Toronto Area transition from unemployment to economic independence. The mission of Dress for Success is to empower women to achieve economic independence by providing a network of support, professional attire, and the development tools to help women thrive in work and in life. This is our third year presenting our Mastering the Job Search workshop, but the first time hosting completely virtual. Over the past year and a half, it's been well documented that, unlike in previous recessions, job losses have been concentrated among women. In Canada, women make up just under half of all paid workers, but account for 2/3 of all job losses. We're here to help change those statistics and support women in their journey to career success and economic independence. This week's workshop will consist of a series of 5 workshops focused on how to effectively job search in these unprecedented times. These virtual workshops will provide you with the tools and resources you need to master your own job search. If you're joining us for the first time today, let me catch you up on our stellar kickoff we had yesterday. We were joined by our keynote, Heather McCrory, CEO, North and Central America for Accor, and by our Toronto Mayor, John Tory. We delivered our first session hosted by LHH, where Mina Kayla Gambier, a senior career advisor and career coach, presented navigating and adapting the job search during a pandemic. Today, we're building on the skills learned from yesterday and focusing on your resume and the interview, giving you the tools you need to land the job you want. Before I begin, I want to say thank you to our sponsor for making this conference possible. Thank you to our event sponsors, BMO Capital Markets, Mackenzie Investments, and Torstar. Thank you to our session partners from LHH, Crowe Soberman, the Humphrey Group, Accenture, and Indeed, and to all of our add-on partners, Mars Canada, ICF Toronto Chapter, and Toronto Crew. Without the support of all of our partners, this week's events wouldn't be possible, so thank you very much. It now gives me great pleasure to kick off our second day and introduce you to a familiar face, our very own career program and volunteer manager, Cassie Luders.
Thank you, Kate. Today's session will be covering the topic of landing the job you want, compelling resume writing and interview preparation, presented by our speakers from Crowe Soberman. Today we have Daniela Tornero, Annalise Borman, and Amanda Dimitri. You can check out their bios in the event platform to learn more about their work with Crowe Soberman and what Crowe Soberman is all about. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the best types of resumes, the do's and don'ts, and an activity to really help you get the feel of how to apply everything that you're going to learn. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Daniela Tornero.
I'm Daniela Tornero, and I'm joined here today by my lovely colleagues, Amanda Dimitri and Annalise Borman. I'm going to assume that everyone here today is looking for a job. So perhaps you've been looking for a while and nothing has happened yet, or maybe you're already employed and looking to make a move, or perhaps you're wanting to change careers entirely. Well, like you, I've been there before, applying to jobs that I really wanted and having the desired skills, but I didn't always get a call back. And you might ask yourself, well, why is that? Well, I too was curious and have done countless hours of research on that very topic. By the end of today's presentation, you'll know how to customize your resume for the job that you want, know how to improve your chances for a callback, and know how to prepare for the virtual interview. So as human resource professionals, Amanda, Annalise, and I screen hundreds of resumes for any given opening to find the strongest candidate that embodies the skills and the competencies the position seeks. Inevitably, great candidates such as yourselves are passed up. And again, you might ask why. First, let's consider the average time a hiring manager spends reviewing a resume. And there have been countless studies done on this, some using infrared technology to see where hiring managers concentrated their search. So those studies showed that typically the eye goes to the top of the page, quickly scans over the experience and education, and hits the bottom of the page. So typically if there are any volunteer information, some hobbies, it would be displayed there. So let's consider that the average hiring manager spends reviewing a resume. So on average, it's about 6 seconds. So how do you summarize your career and all of the skills that you've acquired along the way effectively in 6 seconds? We'll get to that shortly. Secondly, if you're applying for a job online, chances are you're going through an applicant tracking system, and you need to get past the system before you even have a chance of being reviewed by a hiring manager. Lastly, when you do receive the call back, we're going to take you through preparation for your virtual interview so you know what to expect, so you can focus on demonstrating why you're the ideal candidate. So without further ado, let's get started. If you have any questions at any point throughout the presentation, as mentioned, please include those in the Q&A section, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to answer. All right. Okay, so today's agenda. What we're going to be covering today is the elements of an effective resume, some common mistakes, some do's and don'ts. We'll touch on cover letters. We'll go through elements of a job posting, the applicant tracking system, interview preparation, what to do during, do's and don'ts, and then follow up. Okay, so there are a variety of built-in resume and cover letter templates to Microsoft Word. So this is a great starting point if you don't know where to begin, if you need to revamp your existing resume if it's not being effective. So keep in mind when selecting a template, remember your audience. So for professional roles, you want something a little bit more toned down that's going to speak and highlight your skills and qualifications and your education. For marketing type roles, something with graphics and color might be appropriate, but keep in mind, again, if you're applying online, it's going through an applicant tracking system, and that could be problematic. And we'll get to that later in this presentation. I also want to point out in this example here that there are a few templates here with pictures on them. Unless you're an actor, including a picture is not advisable. Pictures could lead to biases made against you, and you really don't want to do that. Okay, this is an example of a chronological resume. It's probably the most popular resume format. It lists your work history in the order of date with the most recent position at the top. It might include a resume objective or a career summary just above it, and then listing your education, some skills, hobbies directly below. Okay, a functional resume is particularly attractive if you're a recent graduate or if you're switching careers and you don't have that experience. You may want to consider the functional resume. So unlike a traditional resume, the functional resume does not highlight your chronological work experience. Instead, it's focusing your skills that you've acquired that fit the requirements of the job which you're applying to. So instead of listing the jobs, the functional resume groups skills and accomplishments in special categories. Okay, so this is a neat little feature that's also built into Word. It's called the Resume Assistant. And I actually stumbled upon this when I was updating the slide and realized that I was logged into my computer and it directly linked my LinkedIn profile. So it's identified my role in my industry. It's provided me samples, work experience examples for positions or people that hold similar positions in the field. So if you get stuck on wording, this is a great tool to reference. Directly below that, you'll find what the top skills are for my profession. And because resume writing is very focused on research, please do your research. Make sure that you know what employers are looking for when crafting your resume. There's some handy little articles that you can read. And then at the very end, it will even show you available jobs in your field. So you can apply directly to them. Okay. So resume design. it is highly important. As I mentioned, 6 seconds is the average time a hiring manager is reviewing your resume. So you need to grab the reader's attention immediately. So if the eye goes to the top of the page, conventionally, resumes would start with an objective. Now, when a hiring manager puts out a position, it's because the organization has a need. So telling a potential employer what you're looking for might not be the most helpful. Instead, what you want to do is let the employer know what you offer. So here is your need. This is what I bring. So there's an example there. So consider replacing the objective with this career profile. And this goes by many different names, so it doesn't really matter what the heading is, just so long as you're capturing that vital information there. So a career profile typically is 1 to 5 sentences. It's an introduction at the top of the resume, and it's highlighting your most recent or relevant career experience, your skills, and your achievements. Employers want to know that you have accomplished things, that you have demonstrated abilities. So the first sentence of the resume summary should always include the biggest professional selling points. So typically it might be the highest job title or degree that you hold. The second sentence will follow up with the number of years of experience that you have. And the third would be the main responsibilities and achievements that you made during those years. If you have no experience, don't worry, you can still write an effective summary. So what you'd want to do is then focus on 2 to 3 sentences, and you might highlight in the first section the descriptive adjective. So your current standing, whether it be a student or a job seeker, is fine. If you have a GPA that you want to reflect there, by all means, and any relevant experience from outside of the classroom you'd want to highlight there. Okay, career highlights. So this is another option directly below your summary if you choose to include it. So rather than providing a laundry list of generic skills, like if you're telling a hiring manager that you're a quick learner, well, that's not subjective. You're not providing any background to claim that you are, detail oriented or you're a team player. Give concrete examples, right? Because those adjectives are just opinion based. So you want to be able to quantify your accomplishments with concrete evidence, as I mentioned. And there's various approaches to writing. You can use the car analogy, which is the challenge, action, and result. So when you're thinking back of, times that you hit it out of the park, or, moments in your career where you felt most accomplished, you're trying to highlight those experiences here and tell potential employers why you're the ideal candidate. Okay, and then next you'd have your work experience if you're doing a chronological resume. So listing, the name of the company, the position that you held, the duration there, maybe some of the major accomplishments or duties of your position. You'll have your education directly below that, any volunteer experience that you may have, awards, honors, and activities. Again, you definitely want to highlight your accomplishments. Employees want to know that you've hit it out of the park, that you are the ideal candidate, essentially. And then hobbies and interests. I like this. It gives the hiring manager a little perspective on you, and you could quickly draw a connection with them. So, if I was a dog lover and you indicated that you love dogs, I might look at your application a little bit longer, because there will be some commonality there. Also to keep in mind when you're crafting your resume that it's important to write for the future, not the past. So you're crafting your message with your career goals in mind. You want to determine which parts of your story that you want to highlight and which to minimize. Don't list references are available upon request, because that's expected. Okay, transferable skills. So this is a reference from What Color is Your Parachute? So Richard N. Bullis is the #1 best-selling job hunting author of What Color is Your Parachute? And he categorizes transferable skills into 3 buckets. So you can classify them as people, data, or things. So transferable skills are skills that you develop throughout your life. They're your personal abilities that mature over time. They can sometimes be developed from a situation and applied to various others. So I'll give you an example. So my first job out of school was a customer service position for a distributor or delivery service example. And so typically they would have one customer service representative work the weekend to support the deliveries that were going out that Saturday to customers. Well, one Saturday I received an irate phone call from a customer who only received 1 box of 2. So they're very upset. They wanted their delivery. There was no possible way that I could get it to him. So it could have been acceptable that I just told the client that, I'm sorry, you'll just have to wait till Monday. But I thought, okay, there has to be a better way. So I took it upon myself to walk down to the warehouse, try to locate the missing box. I did find it. It was left on the SKU. I was able to drag it across the warehouse floor to the receiving bay. Relationships are very important, and I've made a point to make lasting relationships with my coworkers. And I knew one of the delivery drivers that was en route that Saturday was friendly with me, and I could call on and ask a favor. I asked him to come back to the warehouse to pick up the parcel to deliver it to the client. It was then that I realized that critical thinking and problem solving was one of my pros. It was a skill that I had that I didn't know that I had until I was put in the position to figure it out. There was nobody to ask. I just had to use the resources that I had available to me and try to find a solution to the problem. So when you're looking back at your accomplishments in your career, finding moments like that and translating them into transferable skills will help you to identify your strengths and show that potential employers that, look, you should be considering me. And this is an example of my critical thinking. Okay. Oh, sorry. We'll advance here. Okay. So part of designing your resume is research. So it's always handy to have a look at what skills your profession or your industry is seeking. So I did just a generic search of what the top skills for 2021 were, and I came up with these 9 soft skills. So like my earlier slide, Microsoft Word does have this built in. So use it. Employers don't always list every quality that they're looking for in a candidate because anybody can go and copy and paste from the job description. So typically they'll hold back a few things to see if you identify as having these skills. So always do your research, know what they're seeking, and make sure that it's reflected in your resume. All right. This is just a little bit of a resource if you're stuck on how to describe the skills that you possess. So they could be verbs, so your natural skills, your talents, and your gifts. Nouns could be your work subject skills or knowledge skills. And your adjectives are your personal trait skills. Okay, and I'm going to pass the floor over to my colleague, Amanda Dimitri now.
Thanks, Daniela. Common resume mistakes. According to Fast Company, there are 5 common resume mistakes women can make that hurt their chances. So please keep in mind the following when drafting and updating your resume. Women often undersell themselves, which is illustrated by the language we use. Men often use language like lead, founded, and executed, while women tend to use help, aided, and contributed as part of a team. This will especially impact someone's chances if an applicant tracking system, ATS, is pre-screening based on leadership skills or power language for a position of authority. State your worth with authority. Go through your resume and highlight your major achievements, awards, and promotions. If you take on additional duties outside the job, just describe and note them on your resume, as this underscores your ability to go above and beyond while still showing your aptitude for time management. Often people feel uncomfortable communicating so strongly about themselves. But employers do not want to hire okay people. They want to hire great people. So you need to advocate for yourself. Use a strong story to describe your journey. Include an executive summary or elevator pitch to stand out in front of recruiters. This info can also be included in your cover letter or highlight section. It's important to convey your story well. As mentioned earlier, communication is one of the #1 skills employers are looking for, so this is your opportunity to sell or market your skill yourself. If there are breaks in your employment, address them up front and frame them into your story. Get the readers interested in learning more about you. Create a narrative of your work experience and use details. If you're applying to a new field or industry, draw connections from previous work or life experience into the skills being sought by the employer. Take a less is more approach. Avoid unnecessary detail like others assisting you or you worked as part of a team. On the quest to provide accuracy and professionalism, we can often overshare unnecessary details that distract from the accomplishment. The most basic example is including that you were part of a team that made a significant accomplishment. Most assignments cannot be completed in silo, so be safe to assume that the recruiter will expect that other people were part of the team. Hence, the additional info is unnecessary and will weaken your success. Quantify your accomplishments with assertive language. Women are more likely to leave out professional achievements and important experiences on their resume. Review your resume for weaker language like help, aided, assisted, and update it with descriptive words that would better illustrate your impact on that project. For example, you may have helped run a team, but maybe you should consider changing it to led a team. Let's go through some do's and don'ts. On the average, a hiring manager spends seconds reviewing a resume and cover letter. So we have to do everything we can to make those seconds count. Treat your resume as it's a first impression potential employers will get of you. This is the first time a potential employer will learn about you, so you want to make sure your resume is clear and strong to capture a reader's attention. This is often done with a strong headline. A colleague of mine recently was blown away by a catchy, punny headline. The candidate did meet all of the desired experience and skill requirements, but his personality really pushed him to the top of the list. Emphasize your experience with current trends in your industry. Ensure your resume is well written and laid out in a concise manner. As mentioned before, less is more, so choose your resume style and wording wisely. Make sure spelling and grammar are correct. I was recently recruiting for a position that required strong attention to detail, and a candidate had a small typo. They swapped an O for a 0. It is a small detail, but it proved the candidate wasn't suitable for the position, so please be mindful. Keep it to 2 pages at most, and highlight only relevant job experience. I'll discuss this in greater detail in a little bit. Okay, some don'ts. Don't misquote the job posting. Don't misspell the company name when you apply or when you're modifying your resume for the specific role. In an effort to be clear and concise, you can miss the point and not provide the information needed. So please be mindful that you're including enough detail. Never embellish or lie. If you can't speak French or know how to use Excel, don't try to pretend. These lies may land you the job, but will quickly be discovered, and you'll have to start this process all over again with a tarnished reputation. However, if you are learning French but are not fluent, you should include this in your cover letter. Do not list every position you've ever held. Maybe my brief stint as a babysitter may help if I'm applying to a nursery school, but it doesn't hold the same weight if I'm applying to a bank. However, if I'm an entrepreneur that managed my own company, which happened to be babysitting, and I manage the day-to-day operations, including the daily financials, then this would be applicable to the position in the finance industry. Please be mindful that your personal email says a lot about you, and Sexy Lexi may be very qualified, but her first impression may be inappropriate. Don't forget that your online presence. Employers do their homework. You may want to Google yourself to make sure you're aware of anything an employer might find. I know Daniela discussed resumes in detail, so let's take a moment and understand the cover letter. You can include a cover letter in an email body when submitting a resume, an online application, or in a separate document. A cover letter allows you to further introduce your skills and explain why you want the position and how you're perfect for it. You can summarize the reasons why you're interested in the role, the organization, and how your qualifications align with it. This is also a great place to communicate skills or experiences that you did not include in your resume, but that apply for the position. You can also mention any breaks in your employment and the reasons. Perhaps you went back to school, or you may have had an unfortunate family situation that required your full attention. Again, less is more. Do not overshare. Elements of a job posting. So when drafting a base resume, it's helpful to review job descriptions of positions you are interested in. This information will help you assess what's important to include and what should be left out. A typical job posting is made up of two sections. Firstly, the role and the duties. This area describes the role, the daily duties or tasks assigned to the position. The second component describes the type of candidate they're looking for specifically their qualifications, skills required to complete the role. You can learn a lot about the company and what they're looking for by their job posting. Some will really focus on soft skills, personality traits, and others will be very formal, with all details relating to the specific experience. Your resume should mirror the style of the job posting, but a bit more on that in a little bit. Okay, excuse me, applicant tracking systems, the dreaded ATS. If you've already applied for some positions, you're familiar with the interface of an ATS. An ATS can help streamline hiring and save valuable time. They can also help remove biases and occasionally overlook great candidates. An ATS typically work with keyword searches to allow a hiring manager to focus on a smaller group of candidates. The keywords they may use depends on the role. If it's an IT role, they may look for specific software. If it's a professional role, they may look for specific education or qualifications. So how do you make sure your resume is read correctly by an ATS? Firstly, clean, clear resumes. Fancy fonts and graphics are fun, but they confuse the system and may cause an ATS to overlook important aspects of your resume. Secondly, ATS have clear instructions on how to upload your resume, including file type. Please make sure you read the fine print. Some ATS only read PDFs, while others only screen in Word documents, so please make sure you're aware. If you're curious to see how your resume will be interpreted by an ATS, we have found that there are many free sites that will interpret it for you to give you an idea, such as topresume.com. Please change or remove your personal info, such as name or contact info, if you're going to use one of these websites. Nowadays, we really have to be careful who you share your personal details with. ATS don'ts. ATS are programmed to read right to left. So if you've included columns, the content you included may not be interpreted as you had planned. Headers and footers are often ignored, so please make sure you include all the info in the body of the document. Stick to conventional headings, such as education and work experience, as it's not the place to be creative. Hyperlinks can sometimes display as the link, so be mindful when you include them. If you're trying to include a portfolio link, link it from the word portfolio instead of somewhere in the content. Use normal, boring fonts. They will have the best chance of being interpreted properly by an ATS. Daniela, do you want to take us through a little bit of an activity?
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so if we were all together, we would be doing an interactive activity. So this is a little quote that I like that sort of ties in what we've been discussing and applying it. So this will be your take-home activity. You can refer to the left-hand side of the page under Documents where you can find it. Oh, I'm having issues advancing the slides. Bear with me. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the first part of the handout is what we discussed earlier, is highlighting your accomplishments. So basically you can use the CAR method or any method that you like. You can also use the STAR method, which is identifying the situation, the task, the action, and the result. So when you're writing effective resumes and highlighting your accomplishments, this is an excellent way to be concise in the delivery of that message. Okay, and the next activity for you to take away is identifying your transferable skills. So, such as the example that I provided earlier about critical thinking, I'm sure there have been many instances in your careers where you've done something well, you problem solved, you communicated effectively with someone, you worked as part of a team, and you really want to highlight these skills to potential employers. They are transferable, they go with you from position to position. So this activity here was developed by a career coach by the name of Christine Edick. She uses this exercise to help her clients identify transferable skills. So most clients find that they can identify at least 50% of transferable skills needed for their new job. And the way to do this is, so the first step is to find the transferable skills. So you can use online resources, such as NOCs, so National Occupation Codes. You can find those online for free. You can try a variety. Oh, sorry, that's the second step. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So have a look at the research, see what the positions call for, and the skills so that you know how to target your writing. The second step is pinpointing the transferable skill. So using online resources such as the Myers-Briggs type indicator, disc profile method, there's various available to you all for free. All it does is help us to identify some soft skills that we might possess, some interpersonal styles that we have, and behavioral strengths. And then the third is tying it all together. So adding your transferable skills to your resume is discussed in the previous slides. Okay, and I'm going to pass it back to Amanda now.
Okay, so now you're ready to apply for a position. What do you do? Find a position that's suitable to your skills and desired career and review the job description. Are you a fit for the job? Do you have the required skills and experience to be considered for the job? If you answered yes to both of those questions, then you are now able to modify your resume and tailor it to that job posting. What resume type should I use, chronological or functional? Well, that depends. Do I have experience from very early on in my career that would be applicable to this role? If yes, then perhaps a functional resume would be more appropriate. If the experience is more recent, then a chronological resume would be more appropriate. If you have some applicable experience and some unapplicable experience, a functional resume again is appropriate, but please omit any work experience that's not applicable to the position. Next, I would consider whether I've included the content that would speak to the skills and experiences they're looking for. If not, add it. Then I would consider if I've done similar tasks in previous roles. If so, make sure you're using similar or the same language of the posting. Don't make a hiring manager guess. When reviewing the posting, does it appear more geared to a type of personality? If so, and you think you're a good fit, try to speak to those personality traits in your cover letter. I know that modifying your resume and cover letter for each job will take time, but if done it correctly, it will make a lasting first impression. Okay, now that we've applied for jobs, what do we do? Firstly, keep track. Having the name of the position, the company, and the job description handy would be very helpful, especially when you get a phone interview. I find keeping an Excel document up to date and saving your modified resumes with the name of the position and company you are applying for is very helpful. It would be awkward to go to an interview and the person has a different version of your resume than you do. Double check that your voicemail is professional, and if you don't have voicemail, now would be the time to set it up. Keep it simple and professional. Just in case you're curious, mine is, "You've reached Amanda. Sorry I missed you. Please leave a message." Often a recruiter will call you out of the blue to do a phone screen. If you're in the shower or the dog is barking or kids are crying, don't answer the phone. I'll repeat, don't answer the phone. They will likely leave you a message, and this will allow you to find a quiet place to return their call. If you do answer an error, ask if you can call them back or arrange a time the following day, then you can give them your full attention. Some recruiters may send you an email to set up an initial call. Please check your email and your junk folders regularly. Okay, so now you've applied and they want to set up a virtual interview. What is a virtual interview? Annalise, can you tell us?
So there are two types of virtual interviews. So the first one we see is the one-way interview. So this is where the interviewee will receive a series of questions in either in a text or video format that you can respond to these questions. So the one perk of this method is you can take a couple tries at answering the question. You can re-record your videos. You can also redraft your text answers. The second type of virtual interview is the two-way interview, which is very similar to an in-person interview. It's a live face-to-face interview that is conducted through a video conferencing platform. So the company's just called and you have a virtual interview tomorrow morning. Now what? So at this time, you're going to receive information from the interviewer, which will give you all the details you need to be prepared for your interview tomorrow. So you'll know the time, the date, what platform you're going to be using, who you'll be meeting with, and all of these key details are going to help you prepare for your interview tomorrow. So first, it is a virtual interview, so technology is included in this. So what device will you be using? Whether it's a computer, a tablet, or a cell phone, make sure it's all fully charged or directly plugged in so you don't lose connection during the interview. At this time, you'll also want to test the camera and the microphone just to make sure it's in good working order to see if you need to switch devices before your interview. Secondly is your internet connection. So make sure your Wi-Fi is strong, do tests if needed. I always recommend directly connecting through the Ethernet cable so that way you can't lose. Also the software. So as I mentioned in the interview details, you will know what platform you're going to be using. So most commonly right now we're seeing Zoom and Teams be used. These are great platforms. You can use them on the web or downloading the platform itself. One thing I would recommend is always download the software. One thing we're not aware of is the web page platforms don't often have all the capabilities that the downloaded software has. So for example, if you have a panel interview and you're on the web page version, you might not be able to see every video of who's interviewing you. And that doesn't help with nerves. So you want to make sure that you're set up for success and have everything you need. So also audio, you'll want to make sure that you avoid any background noise. So consider using a headset or a microphone if you have that. Your space and your surroundings. So when you're testing your video just to see how you look, be mindful of the backdrop behind you. So this is something you're going to want to avoid any messy or cluttered spaces, but it's also an opportunity for you to connect to who's interviewing you. So as you can see, I do have a bit of a unique background. So every interview or meeting that I attend, it's always an icebreaker. Everybody asks about them, and it allows me to break the nerves and connect with the person who's interviewing me. So your background can work against you or it can work with you. Just be mindful of what is behind you. You'll also want to make sure that the space that you are in is quiet. So if needed, putting a do not disturb note on your door so nobody knocks or rings the doorbell. Also pets in this regard, although they're cute, sometimes my pets like to chime in on meetings and in an interview, not the space. Although they're cute, we want to make sure that it's a quiet space for an interview. Also with the lighting, so if you're in a room with a bunch of natural light, you'll want to make sure that you're facing the natural light source. You don't want your face to be dark. We can't clearly see you, create shadows, and then we can't see you properly. It's also very important for the position of the camera. So you want to make sure you prop up your computer to make it look as close to a face-to-face conversation as you can. So I often see this when I'm FaceTiming with my parents or grandparents that on a cell phone we'll be looking at maybe their chin or up their nose, and although beautiful, not appropriate for an interview. So make sure you are face-to-face for that. And just like an in-person interview, you're going to want to dress for success. It's hard while we're at home. We want to be comfy and cozy, but it is just like an in-person interview. You want to dress for the position. So interview preparation, there's a number of things you can do to prepare before your interview. So the first one is to review the job posting to help prepare for any expected questions you might get. You're also going to want to research the company. So what does their website look like? You might learn something about them that you love and you want to inquire further about it in the interview. These are great resources. You'll also want to research the industry. So if applicable, what is the company? What are they all about? These are things you're going to want to do before the interview so you can bring it to the interview and you're going to look prepared and well equipped for this interview. So as I mentioned, you're also going to receive who will be interviewing you. I always recommend doing a quick Google or LinkedIn search for whoever is interviewing you so you can get to know how long have they been with the company. What are some fun facts about them? What is their background? These are things that you can help connect when you're in the interview itself. You can also prepare examples for questions that you think you're going to receive. So 9 times out of 10, we all want to know, how did you get to this position and what are you looking for? Take me through your employment history. You want to be prepared for that question. It is coming. And you'll also want to prepare suitable questions to ask the employer. So decoding a job description. So as Amanda mentioned, we use the job description to tailor our resume for each position. But it's also a fantastic resource for you to use to prepare for any questions you think you might get. So if you notice that the skills outlined on the job description, for example, say strong attention to detail, this is something you're going to want to make sure that you have an example for, so you can quickly answer that question and you look prepared in the interview. Preparing for these questions also helps you avoid any long-winded answers or oversharing. So oftentimes when the nerves kick in and you're asked a question, sometimes you could make it a longer answer. So if you're prepared for each skill and you have an example, then you're good to go in the interview. So just like an in-person interview, you're going to want to make sure you make eye contact with the camera. Speak clearly, don't rush. Also listen for the questions that are asked and make sure you fully answer them and provide examples. So if you're asked a question, sometimes I'll receive a yes or no answer back, and then I have to ask a follow-up question to further ask for the individual to further explain their experience and examples for that. The perk about being at home and doing virtual interviews is you can post notes for yourself. So if there's things that you want to reference in the interview, you can have multiple screens, you can have post-it notes for you to quickly see and answer your questions when you need them. And take notes, just like you are in person. If you have a notepad and a paper and pen, please feel free to write down any comments or questions that you have so you can remember to ask them to the interviewer again. And don't be afraid to seek clarification. Sometimes in the interview, you think you heard a question one way and you weren't really sure. You want to make sure you're giving the proper answer. So just seek clarification. Can you please repeat that question for me? Be authentic. The best advice I ever received was be yourself. So I give that to you. Just be yourself. And don't forget to ask your questions and thank them for their time at the end of the interview. So after the interview, there we go. After your interview, you're going to want to send a thank you email to the interviewers for their time. Short and sweet, just thanking them and looking forward to next steps. One thing you want to avoid is at the end of an interview, you will be given a time frame of when you're going to hear back for this position. So if they say 2 weeks, I wouldn't recommend following up at the 1.5 week point because they haven't had that full 2 weeks just yet. So do avoid following up, but always send your thank you email. So now we will have our question period.
Okay. As we get started, everyone can't see me, but it is Cassie again asking the questions. So we do have quite a few questions in the chat. So I definitely want to jump into it again. For all the participants on the workshop today, if you see a question that you really want answered that someone else has already put in the Q&A, make sure to upvote it so we can see it. But the first question is, do recruiters prefer 1 or 2 page resume? I have a 1.5 page resume with lots of white space, but I want to put it on 1 page.
Okay, so I can answer this one.
Amanda?
Well, it depends on the content. So as long as you have completely explained yourself and spoke to all of the skills and requirements they're looking for the job, I don't think 1.5 page would be a big deal. 2 pages is fine. If you smushed everything into 1 page and now you've really removed all of your content, you might not get the job. So I don't really advise that. I would try to make sure it's thorough and complete. And if it's a little bit more than 1 page, especially considering no one prints anything anymore, it's not that big of a deal, in my opinion. Annalise, Daniela?
I agree fully. You want to make all of the checks on the job description and appropriately reflect them in your resume. So whatever it takes, don't feel that an employer wants to shave off a couple seconds to just review 1 page. 2 pages are totally fine, or 1.5, whatever it may be.
Okay, great. And how long is too long for a resume, and how should they position it? So should it be objective, education, experience, skill, training and development, and then lastly, language and computer skills, or how would you position it?
That's going to be determined by the position that you're applying for. So if there's a long list of asks, skills that you need to possess, there's, many lines of what you're going to be doing on a day in, day out. You want to make sure that it's appropriately reflected. At the same time, nobody wants to read like a 6-page resume. They don't need, a chronological explanation of every article that you've ever written, every presentation that you've done. This is probably better reflected in your LinkedIn. So if you want to include your LinkedIn there, or like if you have a Twitter for work, whatever it may be, you can link it there, or provide information to a portfolio if it's a visual job type thing. But more than 2 is a little bit excessive, depending on the position. If you're into like a government position, then you do need to hit all of the keywords that they've indicated. So it might run a little bit longer than a conventional, but for most professional settings, it's about 2 pages.
Okay, great. And then what about if you're trying to switch careers? What should your resume look like, and what details should you be including?
So part of the resume design, sorry, Amanda, did you take this one?
No, go ahead.
No? So the functional resume is a great way. If you're switching careers, you don't have the relevant experience, but you can draw on your past experience, or the past things that you've done in your career are similar to the ask in the new career. Definitely use the functional over chronological. And to capture the skills, the categorizations that you're going to be using for the functional resume, make sure that they're appropriately reflected.
Okay, great. And how can I make my resume stand out without going overboard with style?
Resume standing out is more about content and that elevator pitch or your highlights. It's really more about the way you communicate yourself and less about including a fun border or fun font or little pictures or all of your fonts in purple. I've opened resumes that I legitimately could not read. It was like pink and yellow and orange, and a recruiter quickly closes those and moves on to the next one that's just in black and white, as paper should be.
Yeah, and here's your opportunity to reflect your communication skills. Always take a less is more approach. Nobody wants to read paragraphs of everything that you've done in your current or prior positions. Just get to the point, show where you've excelled, what are your accomplishments, what value have you created for these organizations, because that's what employers want to know. They want to know that you've created efficiencies, that you've made them money, that you've saved them money. So if you can highlight this in the work that you've done and your accomplishments throughout, that's far more effective than, a visually appealing resume.
Okay, great advice. There is a little bit of a long question, but very important. Different job titles mean different responsibilities at different organizations. For example, the same role could be known as project manager in one, whereas it could be called research associate in another. How do we convey it through our resume that I was actually doing ABC, even though it was called XYZ?
That's an excellent question. You can use the National Occupation Codes to get the language, but it is also important modifying your resume to the job posting. So if the employer is using certain language, you want to mirror it. Obviously, you don't want to change the titles that you've held in the past to make them match the job description, but you want to speak to all the similarities of both positions. That although this title and cover letter might be the appropriate avenue to express that, although the names of the jobs are different, slightly different, the fundamentals of the job and the skills and qualifications of the job are very similar. So you can speak to how you have that.
Okay, great advice. How many years back should you go in your work history section of your resume?
You should go as far back as applicable. So, like the same way that if someone has immense education, then the fact that you graduated high school is less relevant and is kind of a given. So your first job out of school may not be applicable. Maybe the first 10 years of your career is not applicable and only the most recent 5 are. You really only should include what's relevant to the position and then choose the resume type that highlights that the best.
Okay. And there's a couple more resume specific questions, then I'm going to move into cover letter. Is the objective statement vital to every resume, or is it dependent on the seniority of the position being applied to?
No, it doesn't have to do with the seniority. It's basically capturing your reader's attention immediately. If the hiring manager has to go through your entire resume to pull out your skills and qualifications, chances are they're going to be passing it up real quick. You have seconds to capture. So like writing a great hook, getting the reader interested to read on is very important. As I mentioned, like we can screen hundreds, even get thousands of applications to any given job. You have to beat the applicant tracking system. You have to be effective. You have to mirror what they're asking for and give really solid examples of how you embody those skills.
Okay. And there's a couple questions just about matching. So a resume should be about 80% matching from the resume to the job description. Can you tell us a little bit more about resources that we can use? JobScan, topresume.com, anything that you would like to give advice on?
Amanda, do you want to take this one?
So the question, I think the question says, should 80% match the job? And I'm not sure if that's correct, but it should do what it needs to do for a hiring manager to consider the person qualified for the role. So maybe you're looking at the job and there's 17 qualifications and you fit 12 perfectly, or you fit all 17. Usually qualifications are written in most importance to least importance. So nice to have or an asset wouldn't be a deciding factor, but education or program experience, depending on the role, previous experience in that type of role or industry, these types of things might be more important. So I wouldn't hesitate to apply if you feel like you're qualified, if you feel like you could walk into the job and do it. If you are hesitant, there is some things that we've read that like women are typically a little bit more hesitant to apply for jobs they're not qualified for, while men will apply to everything. So you can always throw your hat in the ring. However, if there is a company that you want to apply for and there are 17 jobs on the board and you apply for every one of them, they're not going to think that there's a specific job that applies to you. So try to be a little bit more selective and make your applications meaningful and resonate that this person specifically applies for this job, not every single position at the company. And then
just
top right, the applicant tracking system. Sorry. So, okay, well, go for it, Danielle.
I was just going to say, so further to Amanda's point, you don't always know what keywords the employers have tagged for their applicant tracking system. You can try to determine it by the job description, but they could keep some behind the scenes. So maybe they want to see if you identify these skills without them asking for them, because then obviously it makes it more genuine for them to assess you as an ideal candidate. So I don't think there's a magic number. I know with certain ATSs, they will parse out like 75% of the applications to just narrow down the pool. So long as you're mirroring the language, because with some applicant tracking systems, they don't use synonyms. So if they've said detail oriented and you refer to it as accuracy, the ATS might not necessarily pick that up. And although you have that skill, it didn't flag it that you did.
Okay, great. There is a lot of questions just about identifying the keywords in the job description and how to include it in your resume. Do you think there's any resources that we could give the participants on how to do this?
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead, Anna.
So often on the posting under required skills, they are always listed in terms of importance. So the first one is extremely important, and then they decrease in importance from there. So a good way to focus your resume is focusing on the top bullet points and then continue to go through. So you'll make sure you want to get the first few for sure.
Okay, great. And then with us being in such a virtual world, do you think it's best to list all of the virtual platforms or the use of different programs on our resume?
It depends on the job and what the job is looking for. Some companies are more Apple-based, so if they're asking for Apple products, then you should be able to speak to that. Most companies I work with are usually Microsoft, so Microsoft Office usually encompasses, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook. You wouldn't necessarily need to include all of them. However, if you're applying for like an assistant who's doing a lot of scheduling using Microsoft Outlook, I would indicate Outlook specifically, or Excel. I would definitely indicate if they are aligned with the requirements of the job.
And also just to add to that, if it's a fully remote position, then it would probably be applicable to include that information. Employers want to know that you can work from home effectively, that you do have all this technology, that you know how to use it, because it'll be less time for them to onboard someone. So if it's relevant, definitely do mention it. If it's remote, there's probably a good chance.
Okay, and then how do you know if the workplace that you're applying to uses an ATS system?
Typically, when the application will go through an interface, they'll usually have fields. You'll put in your name. You might have to break down all of your information, your education, your experience. It'll be very clear that you're providing additional info, as opposed to just submitting your resume via email would be a pretty clear clue that there is no applicant tracking system.
Okay, great. And then before moving on from resumes, there is a question to clarify: where do we put people, data, things, people / data / things? Is it in work experience or the career profile?
So it depends on the format of resume that you're using. So if you use the functional, then you're classifying them by groups of skills. Otherwise, not really sure. I'm sorry, I missed the question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah. Where should they put people / data / things? Is it in work experience or career profile? So I'm assuming is it in the work experience portion or probably in the statement at the top?
Oh, so you can build it into your career profile, If you also have like career highlights and you want to do some bullets, you can include it there. Otherwise, you can also write it into the body of the experience. So it doesn't need to be one central location. It just needs to be there. Top of the page is where the eye goes quick. So if you're capturing the reader's attention, you want to put a couple in there. Then you want to summarize your career highlights. You want to put a couple in there and then reflect the rest in the body. Chances are they'll be read.
Okay, great. And then lastly, I know we touched on this in the presentation, but should I add references available upon request to my resume?
No.
It's not necessary.
Okay, great. So let's move on to cover letters. There is just a couple questions. How do I use the job description to guide my writing for the cover letter?
So, as I mentioned before, some job descriptions, and even if you're looking just looking up different types of jobs, like type in different industries on a search like Indeed or Google you can search through jobs. Some of them are more looking for a team member. They're looking for a fit for the company. They're talking about the type of person they want to hire, where other positions are looking for qualifications. I'm looking for skills and experience to do the job. So depending on how the job description is framed would lend you to kind of speak in the same formality. If it's informal, then your cover letter would be more informal. You're trying to make a connection. If it's very formal, all qualifications, all experience, all like very, very specific, then I would be as professional, using the most professional language and be clear and concise about the information I'm providing. I hope that helps.
Okay, and then for the cover letter and resume, where there's a couple questions just about getting a list of words that we can use for selling ourselves. You mentioned that men use words as lead, whereas women are using words as helping, assisting. Where can we find a good list to put in our resume and cover letter?
I don't have a list handy. But it's more sometimes it's helpful to kind of put a cover letter down and come back to it. So read it as if it's fresh eyes. It's not about you. Think about it as somebody else. What are you saying? If you were reading this, does it sound like someone was very much in a supportive role, or does it sound like someone was leading the way? And you can, by different language, kind of lends and tells that story.
You could also do an internet search for strong language for resumes, and I'm sure you'll turn up quite a number of them. It's been written at length about, so I'm sure you can find articles, some resources, some text available online, some really credible sources. Don't be looking at like Wikipedia. People can populate their own responses and decide that, the color purple is really strong. So you want to include purple as a strong adjective. Don't do that. Use credible sources.
Okay. And if I have a 10-year gap, whether that was to take care of children, whatever it may be, how do I explain that in my resume and cover letter?
So if I had a 10-year gap, I would lend itself more towards a functional resume, as your skills and experiences are applicable, but I would put it in that order, leading with the skills that you have. And then I would speak to it in my cover letter. I have all of this wealth of experience. I have all of these skills in my personal life and in my career. And I am now returning into the job market with all of these amazing skills that I'm happy to provide to you that will support and add value to your company.
And don't be afraid to pull out your personal experiences. If they're relevant to the position, maybe your 10-year departure, you picked up skills along the way that you want to discuss with them. So don't be afraid that maybe you were out of the market for 10 years. That's okay. Like everybody learns every single day. There are skills that you acquired in that 10 years that would probably be relevant to the jobs that you're applying to. So again, use the functional resume and speak to it.
Okay, great. And then just one last question before we move over to interview questions. there's just a couple questions about if I remove job titles which don't apply for the job opportunity I'm applying for, will the employer think I was out of work? And there's also one of, do I have to hide my PhD and 3.5 years of management from my resume if I'm applying for my first job in Canada as an entry-level position?
Okay, so those were 2 questions, right? So can we go back?
Kind of the same, kind of different. So the first one, I'll say the first one again. So if I were to remove job titles which don't apply to the position that I'm currently applying for, will the employer think I was out of work?
So if you have a chronological resume and and some apply, some don't, I would maybe streamline those so you can keep it chronological. If 3 of those jobs don't necessarily apply, for example, I recently hired a bookkeeper that's also a yoga instructor, like things, people have other aspirations in their career, but I would reduce the content to only skills that are applicable for the role that you're applying for. And that way you don't have a gap, but that you can just talk about the transferable skills from that role to the role that you're applying for.
Okay. And then the second question was, oh, sorry?
No. What was the second one?
So it was this participants applying for an entry-level position. It's going to be their first job in Canada, but they do have a PhD and 3.5 years of management experience. So they're afraid of being overqualified. So should they leave those pieces out?
It all depends if your PhD is applicable to the position that you're applying for. So if it's within the same industry or background and you could leverage those skills in the position that you're applying for, then I would definitely include it.
Okay, great. So let's move on to some interview questions. What should I do if there was a technical issue during my interview, i.e. the call drops, it cuts out, etc.?
I am so happy you asked this because I think I forgot to say that at the beginning of your interview, especially in the virtual space, it's encouraged to share your cell phone number or another number that they can contact you at in the event that does happen. So sometimes you can send it through the chat or they'll have the cell phone number just in case anything does happen. So thank you for asking that.
No problem. Very important question. Okay. If I were to do a background research on the interviewer as recommended, what if the interviewer sees that I checked out their LinkedIn? Is that a positive or a negative?
It shows
Positive.
that you're doing the homework. Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh, go ahead, Annalise.
I was going to say it does happen to us. And to me, it shows that you're taking interest in who's interviewing you and doing your research into me as well as the company.
Yeah. Okay. And what are some of the most common interview questions regarding virtual working, would you say?
Okay, so common questions for virtual working. So how do you work independently? How do you keep on task? Communication is huge working remotely because you can't just walk by someone. So how do you build relationships with colleagues? How do you make sure your manager is kept in the loop, kept up to date? Often, a lot of the skills that you would think about in terms of teamwork, communication, attention to detail, time management is huge for working remotely because no one sees what you do. So providing those extra communication updates. So questions I would expect would be, how do you manage your time? What do you do if you need to ask for help? Have you worked remotely previously, or have you had any experiences where you had to work remotely? Softwares that you're comfortable with. Things of that line. Daniela, Annalise, anything you guys can think of?
If they have a dedicated space to work, maybe free of distractions, especially if you've got children at home and you're homeschooling, employers want to know that, that you're still able to stay on task and complete the elements of your.
And of course, suitable internet, because we all need that to work from home.
Yes, that is very important. Okay, there's a couple questions surrounding just thank you notes and thank you emails. So when should I send a thank you email after an interview, and what should it say?
So I'd recommend within a couple of hours after the interview. You don't want to send it right away, but a couple hours after is always nice to say thank you. And short and sweet is the best way to do it. So just thanking them for their time today. You really enjoyed learning more about the position in the company, and that you look forward to next steps. And if they have any further questions about your experience, please feel free to reach out. And then wish them all the best.
And something that I've seen also that impressed me was, it's common for people to get to stumble on a question or not to be able to draw out a good example to reinforce that skill. So I've seen in a follow-up or a thank you that an applicant, after having thought about it, will answer the question via email in the thank you. And I thought, that's an excellent way of sort of closing the loop and answering all of the questions.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, so what is an example of something that I should say at the end of the interview when the employer asks, do you have any questions for me?
So if I would hope that you've already prepared questions, as Annalise had discussed, but if they answered all of your questions in their commentary, you can always say, what are the next steps? Is like an easy one to ask. You can also say, what do you think is the best fit for the position? Or what are the challenges you're expecting in this position for the first 30 or 60 days? Any standard question like that will kind of fill in the gap and hopefully give you an opportunity to ask any follow-up questions as they're providing you more information about the job.
You also want to ask questions that are important to you. So when you're applying for a job, what are you looking for in a company? So for example, if it was me, what's the workplace culture like? What's the team like? Those are all things that are very important to me in a workplace setting. So those are things I'm going to want to know at my future employer. What does that look like? Another great question is you can also ask if they have any questions or concerns about your experience that you can further explain or provide examples to. Because just in case there was a question that you might have skipped over and didn't know or didn't answer the way they wanted, this is their chance to re-ask it and your chance to showcase your skills.
Great. And we have time for 2 more questions. So if you were asked for references that were direct supervisors, but they are either in another country, they're retired, they can't be contacted, what should you do?
Those will come up. You can be honest with the hiring manager that, this is the person that held the position. They have since retired. You can't contact them. Is there someone else that can verify your employment? Maybe a human resources individual, maybe if it was a smaller company, like the owner, someone that knew you well enough to be able to provide a reference would be suitable.
You can also, if it's a matter of connecting on the phone, you could also ask that individual to provide you a handwritten reference that you can provide to the company.
Okay. And our last question is, what are the areas that employers focus the most on in a resume?
For me, you've got to capture my attention right off the bat. So I'll always look at the top of the resume first. I'll quickly scan the body. I'll look at the relevant experience, quickly see if you've identified what I'm asking. And then I'll always look at the bottom. I like seeing people's hobbies and interests, because obviously that's making this person human, right? It's a piece of paper that's selling you. Are you selling yourself in the best possible way?
Fantastic. Okay, so that's all the time that we have for questions today. Thank you so much, Daniela, Annalise, and Amanda for that Q&A. There will be a session tomorrow on storytelling, so if you have more questions just about interviewing and all of that, we will be sure to cover that tomorrow. So again, thank you so much to our speakers, Daniela, Annalise, and Amanda, for delivering that wonderful session. We also want to thank all of our sponsors again and the Dress for Success team. And last but definitely not least, thank you to the participants. We're extremely happy that we were able to provide this workshop for another year. Even though this has been a crazy year, we're still happy that we're able to connect virtually.